Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we're going to be talking about the Atlanta Hawks and what the potential options for the Hawks are now, sort of looking at their future and looking at what they do in this off season with the draft coming up this week. So, really no way to get around it here. This was a relatively disappointing season for the Atlanta Hawks. They finish 10 games under 500. They didn't make it out of the play-in, lost in the very first round of that play-in in the Eastern Conference. So now the focus is on the future. The team got the number one pick in the upcoming draft, and there's some decisions that the team presumably needs to make. Now, the situation with Atlanta is definitely one that is relatively complicated, but if we were to massively oversimplify things to an almost irresponsible degree, the Hawks effectively have two basic choices with a bunch of variations, right? And those two choices are either change the identity of their team entirely or stay the course, try to make minor adjustments, and hope for a step in the right direction, a positive development for them. So for our purposes, we'll start with the choice that I feel is maybe the more radical of the two, and that is changing the team's identity as a whole. What that comes down to essentially is breaking up the guard duo of Trae Young and Dejounte Murray. There is a little bit of reasoning, I guess is the word I would use, behind potentially moving on here for the Hawks. In the Trae Young era, so since they drafted him, the Hawks have made the playoffs 3 times in 6 seasons. They've lost in the conference finals once, and they've lost 2 times in the first round. Across that period, those same 6 years, the Hawks have developed a bit of a reputation of having league average to great offenses, but pretty consistently terrible defense. Across the 6 years that they've had Trae Young, the Hawks have never ranked any higher than 21st in the league by defensive rating. The Hawks have also not won more than 43 games per season across that 6-season span. So if the team were to make some sort of big move or big trade, something to dynamically sort of shake up the foundations of their team, it does seem a little more likely that that move would involve moving on from Trae Young. Now, there's a lot of people who might look at Dejounte Murray in this situation and say maybe he's the one who could be traded instead, or they could both be traded, what have you. Obviously, yes, that is a possibility. I view Murray as being slightly less likely to be traded. The Hawks still owe San Antonio draft picks and compensation for the trade that brought Murray to them in the first place. I believe they owe the Spurs 2 first-round picks and 1 first-round pick swap. So there is still assets owed on the ledger for the Murray trade. So if you were to trade him, the idea would be that you're getting back a return that either balances out or overwrites what they owe to San Antonio. If that offer doesn't exist, then trading him at this point seems still doable, but maybe unwise at this point. It also should be noted that Murray is the smaller of the 2 contracts compared to Trae Young. So if you're going out there looking to trade for another kind of superstar player, Young's contract in terms of value gives you more flexibility in terms of matching for another star player. The downside of this approach to me is the question of who's actually available to trade, right? Are you getting someone better than what Trae Young gives the Hawks right now, or are you just making a trade or a change for the sake of it? Kind of hard to tell. Do the Hawks attach the number 1 pick in that scenario? You know, the draft is, as of the recording of this video, like 1 or 2 days away. So there's a lot of parts to a trade, to a scenario where the Hawks move on from Young and or Murray, where we don't have all of that information. It's kind of hard to tell what they would do. But that leads me into the second option of the two, which is to stay the course. Continue to build around that duo of Trae Young and Dejounte Murray with changes around the rest of the lineup. Now, both players, Trae Young and Dejounte Murray, are under contract through at least the 2026-2027 season. So there is, technically speaking, no immediate pressure to move either one of them if the team does not want to. I think a lot of people are getting caught up in the fact that the Hawks got the number 1 pick. That has instilled a certain sense of urgency among some people talking about the Hawks. And it is true. The number 1 pick gives them an opportunity and a window that is closing, as the draft is just about on top of us. But they don't necessarily have to move now if they don't want to. The Hawks could keep Young and Murray. They could use that number 1 pick to infuse some extra talent into their lineup for incredibly cheap. I know this draft class is not receiving a crazy amount of hype. There's a lot of people who are kind of down on the players in this class. But if you're Atlanta, surely you can still find some help with the number 1 pick. Maybe you don't get a superstar player, but you can get someone who can 100% help out this roster as a 3rd, 4th, 5th option behind Trae Young and Dejounte Murray. The question, if you're Atlanta, then, if you're still looking to make some maybe minor changes, is do you move on from one of your other sort of secondary or role players, right? Guys like Bogdanovich, DeAndre Hunter, Clint Capella are kind of the obvious candidates on that front. Among those three, DeAndre Hunter kind of comes across as maybe the most obvious choice to be traded or let go. He's the bigger contract between himself and Bogdanovich in terms of money, and the recent sort of improvements and developments from Jalen Johnson, who plays pretty much the same position, could make the Hawks slightly more comfortable, slightly more willing to move on from Hunter. A similar thing could be said for Clint Capella. He's in the final year of his contract, so you could dangle him to another team as an expiring asset, get some value back there. If they do choose to move on from Clint Capella, Onyeka Okongwu is looking like sort of the heir apparent in terms of your starting center. So the Hawks could make some moves to get rid of guys who have sort of been there for a little bit and try to refresh, get some picks, get some young guys or veteran presence, whatever it is they're looking for. They have assets that they could turn into some of those new players. At the end of the day, though, the Hawks will have the same problem with their roster no matter which of those two choices that they make. That problem has been that the offensive production over the last 5 or 6 years or so has largely not been able to account or make up for some pretty atrocious defensive efforts, right? And no matter what they choose to do, trade the players, trade the pick, keep everyone, some variation in between those two extremes, the Hawks could benefit from becoming a better defensive unit. As I said, they have not ranked better than 21st in the league by defensive rating across the last 6 seasons. So they could stand to become a better team defensively. If they can't do that, then the other option is to go the route of someone like the Indiana Pacers, to become an absolutely elite team in terms of both their scoring totals and their shooting efficiency. And when I say elite, I'm talking maybe top 3, top 4 in the league in terms of points, in terms of, you know, field goals made, field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, things like that. They would need to go to the extreme end of not having defense, right? Where your offense is just so good that you still manage to win games. Now, with this in mind, I'd personally lean more towards the team not really blowing things up at the moment. The Hawks may not be winning as many games as they want. They may not be making deep runs into the playoffs, but the odds of them stumbling into offensive talents like Young and Murray a second time within the next 2 to 3 years or so that you'd be starting up a rebuilding process seems incredibly low. It feels worth it to take the risk on improving this current roster before Atlanta goes about sort of blowing it all up to start from square one, especially since it still owes assets to other teams. As I mentioned, they still owe multiple picks to the Spurs. So it's going to be hard no matter what, but I see the Hawks having an easier path to becoming either a better defensive team or a top offensive team in terms of, as I said, both scoring and efficiency, as opposed to trying to start entirely from scratch and build a competitor by trading away one or more of their stars. So it's not an easy decision for Atlanta either way, but I think the less drastic approach might be best for them. But what do you think? Should the Hawks blow it up? Should they try to trade Trae Young or Dejounte Murray? If they do, what does that market look like? Who do you think that the Hawks could get back in exchange for one or both of those star players? Or do you think, sort of along the same lines as me, do you think that they should just try to make minor changes and continue building around Young and Murray? In that case, who goes? Is it DeAndre Hunter? Do they keep Clint Capella? Do they use this number one pick that they've got? And if so, on whom? There's a lot of questions for the Hawks at this point. But either way, please feel free to let me know what you think. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.